I became the new nanny for a millionaire CEO's twin daughters, and what happened on day one shocked everyone. Welcome back with a new real shock story. Before we start, comment and tell me which city you're watching from. At the end, don't forget to subscribe and rate it from 0 to 10. Let's enjoy the story, everyone.
I still remember the first morning I realized something was terribly wrong. The mansion was quiet. Too quiet. Outside, the sun had just begun to rise, spilling golden light across the enormous windows, but inside, it felt cold and empty. I stood at the top of the grand staircase, my heart thudding, watching my twin sisters, Lily and Nora, shuffle into the dining room. Their small hands clutched nothing but invisible fears, and their eyes didn't meet anyone's. Not mine, not Dad's, not even the staff's. It was like they had retreated into some secret world I couldn't reach. No matter how hard I tried, I've always been close to my sisters. Always. We played together, laughed together, even shared secrets late at night when the house was asleep. But that morning, everything felt different. They ignored the breakfast I had prepared, pushing their plates away with little force, but every action screamed refusal. I could see Dad standing behind the staff, jaw tight, fingers curling into fists. I knew that look. I had seen it in him at work, when a deal went wrong, when something he couldn't control slipped through his fingers. But this wasn't business. This was our family, and he couldn't fix it. I took a cautious step forward, trying to catch Lily's gaze. "Please, just one bite?" I whispered. But she shook her head, almost imperceptibly, and turned her face to the window. I felt my chest tighten. It wasn't just hunger. It wasn't just stubbornness. Something deeper, darker, was holding them back, and I didn't know what it was. The staff had tried everything. I had watched them for months, coming and going like shadows. Favorite foods, playful games, gentle coaxing. They even tried little rewards, thinking that a chocolate or a toy could melt the ice around my sisters' hearts. But nothing worked. Some days, the silence was so suffocating that even the servants seemed to hesitate in every step, afraid of triggering a new wave of sadness or anger. The mansion, so full of wealth and luxury, felt heavier than any prison I'd ever read about. Dad had everything the world could offer: power, money, influence. But inside these walls, he looked small, helpless. I had never seen him like that before, and it terrified me. He paced the halls late at night, muttering to himself, consulting the staff, consulting me, as if someone, anyone, could finally break through the walls my sisters had built. And I wished, more than anything, that I could. Then, one day, a new nanny arrived. She wasn't like the others. I remember the first time I saw her. Calm, gentle, with a quiet confidence that somehow filled the room without making a sound. The staff looked at her with curiosity, a mix of hope and skepticism. I looked at her and felt something I couldn't quite describe. Maybe it was hope, maybe it was fear, maybe both. She didn't rush in. She didn't demand smiles or compliance. She simply observed. And I watched her, day after day, studying every movement, every glance, every quiet interaction she had with the twins. It was fascinating. Slowly, impossibly slowly, she started leaving small gestures, tiny, almost invisible, around the house. A single strawberry on the table, a small toy in the corner, a whisper of encouragement when no one else was watching. The first spark came quietly. Lily glanced at the strawberry one morning, hesitation flickering across her face. She reached, then pulled back, unsure. Nora followed, eyes wide, hesitant. I felt my heart leap, Could it really be happening? Could this woman, calm and patient, be doing what no one else could? But the tension was thick, and progress was fragile. Some days, the twins would take a tiny bite, and I would rush forward to cheer them silently, afraid to scare the moment away. Other days, they would retreat further, slamming doors and hiding in rooms, leaving the staff and Dad frustrated, and me, heartbroken. Then there were the crashes. One afternoon, frustration boiled over. Lily knocked a chair across the hall. The sound echoed, sharp and terrifying. I froze. Dad rushed in, anger flashing in his eyes. The staff whispered in panic, and through it all, the nanny remained calm. She knelt before Lily, not scolding, not pleading, just there, present, watching. And for the first time, Lily didn't pull away. Her trembling hands brushed against the nanny's gently. Something unspoken passed between them, fragile but real. From that moment, everything began to shift. Little by little, their walls started to crumble. One small giggle escaped. A bite of food was taken without protest. A glance held a little longer. I watched, heart pounding, knowing that progress this delicate could disappear in an instant, but praying it wouldn't. Even as hope began to bloom, the mansion still felt heavy. Fear lingered. Shadows of past pain seemed to hover in the corners. I didn't know what had caused the twins to withdraw so completely in the first place. I didn't know what they had seen, what they had endured, or why the world felt so unsafe to them. But I knew one thing. The nanny had unlocked something important, something beyond meals and toys. She had touched their hearts, slowly, carefully, showing them that someone could care without judgment, that trust could be earned, that love could exist even in silence. And in that fragile, quiet tension, I realized how much courage it had taken, not just for the nanny, but for Lily and Nora. Every tiny action, every small step was a battle against fear, against doubt, against the invisible chains that had held them captive for months. And I, Alec, had been a witness to every moment, feeling the weight of it all pressing on me, yet desperate to see them heal. I don't know how to explain the mixture of emotions, hope, fear, sadness, and awe that filled me that first week. It was like watching something impossible unfold, that something real, raw, and fragile. And I knew, deep down, that the real story was only beginning. Because even as small victories came, the tension never left. Something else, something hidden, something waiting, lingered in the air. And I had a feeling, a sinking feeling, that when it finally revealed itself, nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning, I woke before anyone else. The mansion still cloaked in that heavy, uneasy silence that had become normal. I tiptoed to the dining hall, heart beating fast, and froze. Lily and Nora were already there, sitting side by side, plates in front of them. The nanny was nearby, calm as ever, her hands folded gently, watching. I held my breath. Nothing had changed, yet everything felt different. There was a tension in the air, a kind of fragile hope that hadn't existed before. The girls stared at the food, hesitation in every movement. I could see the tiniest quiver in their hands, the way their shoulders trembled as if carrying a weight too heavy for anyone their age. And then slowly, Lily reached out. Her fingers hovered over a piece of fruit, paused, and then touched it. Nora followed almost instinctively. I wanted to cheer, to run forward and hug them both, but I stayed still, afraid my excitement might shatter this fragile moment. It was just a bite, barely noticeable, but it felt like the first drop of sunlight after a storm. I swallowed the lump in my throat, feeling tears sting my eyes. The nanny smiled quietly, just a tiny curve of her lips, but that smile carried so much meaning, patience, understanding, victory. And in that moment, I realized something important. This wasn't about force or discipline. It was about trust, earned in silence, one small moment at a time. Days passed, each one a careful dance. Sometimes the girls made progress. Sometimes they retreated. There was a rhythm to it, unpredictable and tense, like walking on the edge of a cliff. Every time they smiled, I felt a rush of relief. Every time they cried or refused, my chest ached. I couldn't stop thinking about what had caused this. Was it fear? Was it trauma? Or had the emptiness of the mansion, the absence of warmth from grown-ups too busy to notice, created a cage around their hearts? One afternoon, I followed the nanny as she moved through the house, quietly setting little surprises. A storybook on the floor, a small toy on a chair, a soft blanket folded just so. She never said a word. She simply left these gentle offerings and let the girls discover them. And slowly, like magic, the mansion began to change. The atmosphere softened, filled with tiny sparks of curiosity and laughter that had been missing for months. Then came the incident I'll never forget. I was carrying a tray of fruit when I heard a sudden crash from the hallway. My heart leapt into my throat. Lily had thrown a chair across the hall, shattering the fragile calm. Dad stormed in, his face red, fingers shaking with anger. The staff froze, unsure whether to intervene or retreat. And the twins, they ran, hiding in the corner, trembling as if the world had just collapsed on top of them. But the nanny didn't move in anger. She didn't shout, didn't scold. She walked slowly to the girls, knelt beside them, and simply stayed there. Present, silent, patient. And for the first time, Lily didn't push her away. Her trembling hands brushed the nanny's gently, almost involuntarily. It was a small, almost imperceptible connection, but it was real, and it changed everything. After that day, progress began in bursts. Small giggles escaped the girls in the halls. A bite of breakfast here, a tentative sip of juice there. They began leaving their rooms earlier, peeking around corners, their eyes seeking approval or comfort instead of just fear. I watched them with awe and disbelief. I had never realized how delicate and fragile trust could be, how much courage it could take for a 6-year-old to, simply eat a meal in peace. Still, the shadows lingered. There were days when the twins would retreat completely, refusing even the nanny's gentle guidance. I could see the weight of their fear pressing down on them, felt it in every tremble, every hesitant glance. It was like the mansion itself was holding its breath, waiting to see if the breakthrough would last, or if the girls would retreat into silence again. One evening, I caught a glimpse of them through the hallway mirror. The twins were sitting together, knees drawn to their chests, whispering quietly. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see the trust growing between them, like a fragile plant pushing through cracked stone. The nanny stood nearby, arms crossed loosely, giving them space yet never leaving their side. It was a delicate balance. Too much intervention could break the moment. Too little might let fear take over. And as I watched, I realized that this story wasn't just about meals or chairs or quiet whispers. It was about something much bigger. About patience. About understanding the hidden battles we fight. About the courage it takes to face our own fears and the fears of others. The nanny was teaching all of us, without saying a word, that love and trust can heal wounds that authority and force never could. But even in the midst of these small victories, I felt it. Something lurking beneath the surface. A quiet tension. A shadow that neither I nor anyone else could see yet, but that I knew would reveal itself soon. Something from the past. Some hidden pain. Some unspoken secret that had caused this withdrawal in the first place. I could feel it pressing at the edges of our fragile peace, and I knew that when it surfaced, nothing would ever be the same. And so, I stayed close, watching every small gesture, every hesitant smile, every tiny victory and setback. I became the silent witness to a slow, delicate miracle unfolding before my eyes. And deep down, I knew that this story, the story of my sisters, the mansion, and the mysterious Nanny, was far from over. Something bigger, something shocking, something life-changing was coming. And when it did, I would be ready. It was the kind of morning that felt heavier than usual, the sky overcast as if reflecting the tension inside the mansion. I walked down the hall, careful not to make a sound, listening to the faint shuffle of Lily and Nora's feet. They had started moving around more, exploring the spaces we had all but forgotten they'd once loved. But there was still caution in their steps, a kind of hesitation that made me ache in my chest. The Nanny was already in the dining room, arranging the table quietly. She didn't look up as I entered. Her eyes were on the twins, reading their smallest gestures, noticing every twitch, every glance. I followed her gaze and saw the same hesitation in the girls as always. They wanted to reach out, to touch, to taste, but some invisible wall still held them back. "Slow," the Nanny whispered, not to me, not to the girls, but to the air itself. Patience. And I realized that this was the real battle, not forcing them, not coaxing them, not even pleading with them. It was simply waiting. Waiting while they fought invisible fears, invisible ghosts, while the house itself seemed to hold its breath. Then, something happened that made my heart stop. Nora suddenly ran, not to the table, not to her room, but straight to the hall where we kept the old portraits of our ancestors. Her tiny hands trembled as she touched the frames, as if searching for something she couldn't name. Lily followed her, and for a moment, I felt a surge of panic. What were they doing? What had triggered this sudden movement after all the careful progress we'd made? The Nanny didn't react. She simply followed, her calm presence creating a space for the girls to explore their fear without judgment. I watched, holding my breath. And then I noticed it. Something hidden in their posture, the way they hesitated, the way their eyes darted around. It was more than fear. It was memory, a shadow from the past, a pain they hadn't yet put into words. I wanted to rush forward, to take them in my arms, to soothe and protect. But the Nanny's hand on my shoulder stopped me. "Not yet," she said softly. "Let them face it themselves. We're just here." And I realized she was right. They had to confront their own walls, their own ghosts, or nothing would truly change. Hours passed in this delicate tension. The twins moved slowly through the hall, examining the portraits, whispering to each other in low tones, sometimes laughing softly, sometimes flinching at imagined threats. The mansion itself seemed alive, each creak of the floor, each shadow in the corner, pressing against the fragile piece. And I watched, my heart pounding, knowing that the smallest misstep could unravel everything. By afternoon, the first breakthrough came. Lily, who had barely touched a spoon in weeks, picked up a piece of fruit from the table. She hesitated, eyes flicking to her sister, then to the Nanny, and finally to me. Then, with trembling fingers, she brought it to her lips. It was barely a bite, but it was enough. Nora followed, mimicking her sister, and the smallest sound escaped her. A giggle, soft and almost shy, but real. I wanted to scream with joy, but I stayed silent, letting the moment stretch, letting it breathe. And for a while, everything seemed to settle. The mansion no longer felt like a cage. The walls, though still echoing with tension, seemed slightly less oppressive. We had taken a small, fragile step toward freedom. But just when I thought we were safe, just when I let myself hope, the past reared its head. A letter arrived, slipped under the nanny's door, anonymous but unmistakably ominous. The words were simple, yet they carried a weight that made my stomach twist. They won't last. The fear isn't gone. You can't fix them. I felt panic rise, anger, helplessness, all at once. The nanny read it calmly, then folded it and placed it on the table. No words, no reaction, just a quiet acceptance of the challenge. And I realized something crucial. Our battle was not just with the girl's fear. It was with the world outside the mansion, with invisible forces that had shaped their lives before we even arrived. That night, I stayed up, watching the girls sleep, trying to understand everything that had happened. Their faces were peaceful finally, but I knew it was temporary. Something deep within them had been triggered, something that could rise again at any moment. And I knew the nanny sensed it too. She sat beside me silently, her presence both comforting and unnerving, as if she could see the invisible threads of fear stretching through the room. Over the next few days, the mansion became a battleground of subtle victories and setbacks. A smile here, a tear there, a whispered conversation that hinted at understanding, but didn't yet confirm it. Every gesture mattered, every glance counted, every moment was a test. And through it all, the nanny remained a constant, calm force, guiding, observing, waiting for the moment when the girls would finally face the deepest part of their fear. Then, the inevitable happened. One afternoon, the girls disappeared from the playroom. Panic gripped me as I searched the mansion, my voice trembling as I called their names. Dad appeared, tense, demanding answers, and the staff whispered frantically, afraid of making the wrong move. But the nanny remained calm, placing her hand on my shoulder. "They need to confront it," she said softly. "We cannot control this. We can only be here." I followed her instinctively, and there they were, in the old study, huddled together, trembling. Their eyes were wide, reflecting terror I hadn't seen before. I realized then that the past had finally caught up with them. Whatever invisible walls had held them captive were cracking, revealing something raw, painful, and deeply human. And in that moment, I understood. The journey was far from over. The fear that had dominated our lives was still alive, still waiting, still testing us. But I also knew that the tiny sparks of courage we had ignited could grow into something unstoppable. The question was, could we survive the storm that was coming? Or would it swallow everything we had fought for? It was the kind of evening that made the air feel thick and heavy, the sky dark and restless as rain pounded against the mansion's windows. I remember standing by the staircase, heart racing, feeling a storm inside and outside at the same time. The twins were in the dining hall, sitting silently, plates untouched as usual. But something was different tonight. There was an energy in the room I hadn't felt before, a tension so sharp it made my chest ache. Suddenly, Lily sprang from her chair, knocking it to the floor with a deafening crash. The sound echoed through the mansion, sharp and terrifying. I froze, my stomach tightening. Dad rushed in, anger and fear flashing in his eyes, his voice booming. The staff flinched, and the twins, they huddled together, trembling, eyes wide, fear written across every line of their small faces. I wanted to run forward, to scoop them up, to soothe them, but the nanny held me back with a calm hand on my shoulder. "Not yet," she whispered. "Let them feel it. Let it out." I shook, unsure, but I obeyed. The fear in that room was alive, pulsating, demanding attention. It wasn't just about the chairs or the meals anymore. It was about the deep, invisible weight the girls had carried for months, maybe years. I watched, heart in my throat, as Lily's hands shook violently. She looked at me, then at her sister, and back at the table. Tears streamed down her cheeks, her body quivering with every unspoken thought. Nora mirrored her, silent but trembling, a mirror of fear and despair. I felt helpless, angry, frustrated, and heartbroken all at once. How could this happen after all the progress we'd made? How could the world feel so cruel to them? And then the nanny stepped forward. Calm, steady, unwavering. She knelt beside the girls, her eyes level with theirs, her hands gentle on their tiny shoulders. She didn't speak in commands or plead in desperation. She simply waited, showing them that someone could be present without judgment, that someone could hold space for their fear without trying to erase it. Lily's quivering hands reached toward the table again, this time brushing the fruit slowly, deliberately. I held my breath. Nora watched, then reached for her sister's hand, and together they touched the food. The smallest giggle escaped Nora's lips, a whisper, almost shy, almost disbelieving. But it was real. And then Lily laughed too, soft at first, then louder, like a sound breaking through months of silence. I felt tears streaming down my face. Dad stood frozen, jaw tight, eyes wide, witnessing something he had never thought possible. The nanny smiled quietly, almost imperceptibly, but the meaning of that smile was enormous. It was patience, victory, and understanding all at once. The girls' walls were cracking, their silence was breaking, and I, Alec, could finally feel hope spreading through the mansion like sunlight after a storm. But even in that moment of triumph, the past loomed. The girls froze suddenly, their laughter cut short. I didn't understand. Something shifted in their eyes. Fear returning, a shadow lurking behind the brief spark of joy. I realized, with a sinking heart, that the trauma, the fear, the invisible chains that had held them for months were not gone. They were just waiting for the right moment to surface again. The rain outside intensified, hammering against the windows, echoing the tension inside. I felt every heartbeat as if it were my own, every tremor in the girls' bodies like a physical blow. And then, almost as if summoned, a knock at the front door echoed through the manse. "Yon." The twins froze completely, fear radiating from them in waves. Their fragile progress teetered on the edge of collapse. Dad moved toward the door, but the nanny placed a calm hand on his arm. "Wait," she said, her voice steady. "Let's see. This is part of it." And I realized that this moment, the moment where fear and courage collided, was what would determine everything. The mansion, our lives, the twins' hearts, all hanging by a thread. Lily and Nora looked at each other, gripping hands tightly. I saw the strength in their eyes, faint but undeniable. They were terrified, yes, but they were also deciding, choosing, to face whatever came next. And in that choice, I felt the weight of their courage pressing down on me, lifting me at the same time. The door creaked open slowly, the light from the hall spilling into the room, and the figure outside was nothing extraordinary, yet in that moment it felt monumental. The twins didn't scream or run. They stayed put. They faced it. And I knew then that the invisible walls of fear, the silence that had gripped their lives, were finally starting to crumble. Not completely, but enough to show that healing was possible. I wanted to rush forward, to celebrate, to cry, to laugh. But I stayed still, letting the moment breathe, letting the girls feel that their courage mattered, that their small actions could withstand even the shadows of the past. And as the rain continued to fall, the mansion seemed to exhale, a fragile calm settling over us, though the storm outside mirrored the storm inside. And in that quiet, tense space, I asked myself, and anyone listening, something I couldn't shake. Could this fragile breakthrough hold? Could courage and trust overcome the deep scars left by fear? Or would the shadows return to undo everything we had fought so hard to achieve? I didn't know the answer yet, but I did know this. The mansion, the T-Quartet, Wins, the nanny and I, Alec, were forever changed. Nothing would ever be the same. And the real journey, the one that would test all of us to our limits, was only just beginning. The days that followed were quieter, but the silence felt different this time. Not heavy, not oppressive. It was calm, tentative, as if the mansion itself had learned to breathe again. Lily and Nora moved through the rooms with more ease, their tiny footsteps lighter, their laughter softer but genuine. I watched them, heart swelling, feeling tears rise that I couldn't hold back. It was the first time in months, maybe years, that the house felt like a home instead of a cage. Meals were no longer battles. The girls began to eat slowly, sometimes laughing as they did, sometimes whispering to each other about things I couldn't hear. Even Dad, who had spent months pacing the halls in frustration and helplessness, began to smile genuinely again. I noticed the weight lifting from his shoulders, a quiet understanding settling in his chest. That love, patience, and connection were far more powerful than money or authority. The nanny remained a constant presence, calm and patient, guiding without interfering, teaching without speaking the lessons aloud. I realized something profound watching her. Healing isn't rushed. Trust isn't forced. True change comes slowly, one tiny step at a time, and sometimes the smallest gestures can have the biggest impact. That tiny strawberry, the quiet moments of attention, the patient waiting, all of it had mattered more than I could ever have imagined. But even with the calm, I couldn't forget how fragile it all had been. I remembered the fear in their eyes, the crashes, the trembling hands, the moments when it seemed nothing would ever break through. And I thought about all the invisible battles children face every day, the fears and pain that adults might never see. The story of my sisters wasn't just ours. It was a reflection of so many lives, of so many struggles that remain hidden behind closed doors and silent tears. I walked through the mansion, but I do know this. Healing is possible, trust can be rebuilt, and even the deepest fear can be met with courage and love. And as long as we remember to notice, to care, and to act with patience, maybe, just maybe, we can make the world a little less frightening for those who are still waiting for someone to see them. The mansion, the twins, the nanny, and I, we are all changed forever. And as I watch Lily and Nora laugh together in the fading light, I realize that sometimes the smallest moments carry the most powerful lessons. And perhaps, if we are brave enough to pay attention, the story doesn't end here. It just begins again, in every act of kindness, patience, and courage that we offer to the world.